Your Excellencies, our guest speaker, Mr. Sebastian Abbot, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture about Qatar's search for football's next superstars as part of Georgetown University and Qatar's FIFA World Cup 2022 lecture series. My name is Ahmed Dalal and I'm the Dean of Georgetown University's Qatar campus. Tonight's event is part of a larger effort by Georgetown University in Qatar to deliver high-quality research-informed analysis of current events, which we call here our virtual hub for global dialogue, engaging communities, finding solutions. It has been a long-standing part of our research strategy to observe the developments related to the World Cup through a social science lens and to develop targeted education and knowledge to support preparations for the much anticipated event. Some of our past efforts have included developing an academic framework and certification for a diploma program to train sports management professionals at Jusur Institute. Also, our Center for International and Regional Studies, CIRS, working group on sport, politics, and society in the Middle East led to a publication on the topic edited by today's moderator, and another forthcoming publication on football in the Middle East. CIRS also recently launched the Building a Legacy Qatar FIFA World Cup 2022 research initiative under the direction of today's moderator, Dr. Danyel Reiche, which is exploring the implications of staging this particular World Cup on the social, political, and economic development of Qatar, as well as on regional and global affairs. Under this initiative, CIRS engages academics and practitioners in giving expert analysis in the media and through blogs and podcasts, and through this focused lecture series, for which past lectures have included David Goldblatt giving a historical overview of the FIFA World Cup and Matthias Krug talking about Qatar's engagement with football over the years. Both lectures are available on the CIRS website. Among other topics, the podcasts also and the blog posts examine important aspects of the World Cup and sports more broadly, such as the impact on sports from the pandemic and the blockade, the role of media freedom, the development of women's sports, infrastructure development, and national identity, to name just a few. Tonight's lecture by Mr. Sebastian Abbot continues this thread by highlighting a story in Qatar's football history. The other major arm of the initiative that we've launched in CIRS is traditional academic research on the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar, and we hope to produce analysis and publications on the legacy of the World Cup 2022 in Qatar to be edited by Professor Reiche. So let me conclude by introducing the moderator of tonight's event, who will in turn provide the proper introductions to our guest speaker. This year and next year, Professor Reiche, a visiting professor at Georgetown University in Qatar, coming to us from the American University of Beirut. At AUB, at the American University of Beirut, he's a tenured associate professor in comparative politics. Professor Reiche leads the CIRS research initiative and is also teaching courses for our Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service degree program. He received his PhD in political science from Leibniz University of Hanover, and his areas of expertise are sports, politics, and energy policy. Professor Reiche co-edited the 2019 Georgetown University CIRS-sponsored book, Sport, Politics, and Society in the Middle East, published by Oxford University Press and Hearst, and he is the author of the 2016 book, Successes and Failures of Countries at the Olympic Games. Tonight, he will be speaking with reporter Sebastian Abbot, and although I will let Professor Reiche introduce him, I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Abbot, for joining us tonight and for engaging with Professor Reiche on the development of sports teams in Qatar. This event is an example of the important place that research and analysis has in offering insights into the events and issues of our day for both academics and the wider community. We are honored to provide a platform for this conversation, which will be followed by an open discussion with the audience. Thank you for joining us. Now it's my pleasure to turn over the microphone to Professor Reich. Thank you for orchestrating the CIRS research on this topic and for moderating this lecture series.
Thank you, Dean Dalai, for your kind introduction and for your vision to establish this research initiative. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Sebastian Abbot to discuss his fantastic book, The Away Game, The Epic Search for Soccer's Next Football Star. The book tells the story of Football Dreams, a program by the Qatari Aspire Academy that lasted from 2007 until 2016 and has been described by The Economist as the most ambitious scouting program in sporting history. The first time I met Sebastian was in January 2014 at a youth football tournament in Doha. He told me about his book project. It was the first time I heard about the Football Dreams program. The next time I heard from Sebastian was in March 2018 when I read a very positive review of his book in The Economist and sent him an email to congratulate. Some information on Sebastian's CV. Sebastian has a bachelor's degree in economics from Princeton University and a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. At Princeton, he played as a central defender in the university soccer team, the Princeton Tigers. His coach was Bob Bradley, who went on to become the national coach of the United States and Egypt. Sebastian worked as foreign correspondent in the Associated Press offices in Cairo and Islamabad. In Pakistan, he served as AP bureau chief. In 2014, he was looking for a new challenge and decided to write a book about the Football Dreams program. He worked on the book full-time for 4 years and frequently traveled to Africa, where most of the boys were scouted, to Belgium, where Qatar has acquired a farm team, and to Doha. Sebastian's book has been positively reviewed in many media outlets, amongst them Foreign Affairs and Sports Illustrated. The book was translated into German and Italian. In his approximately 10 minutes long introduction, that will also include a brief video, Sebastian will discuss the origins of the Football Dreams project and provide a general overview of how it worked. After his introduction, I will ask Sebastian a couple of questions before I open the discussion to all participants. For asking a question, you have 2 opportunities. You can click the raise your hand button to ask your question in person once I call your name. You won't be visible while you ask your question. It's audio only. Please note that the event is recorded, and by participating, you consent to the recording. However, there's also a second opportunity to ask your question, which is usually preferred by most attendees, through the Q&A feature. You may type in your questions here and I will read them out to Sebastian, who will then answer them live. Please use for tweets related to this event our hashtag CIRS2022. Sebastian, thank you for joining us today. It's your turn.
Great. Thanks very much, Daniel. Appreciate you all having me join today. Always fun to talk about the book and Football Dreams. As Daniel mentioned, before I sort of launch into my talk, I wanted to show you a short video just to sort of give you a visual sense of what the program was like as Aspire's scouts, traveled all across Africa looking for soccer's next superstar. So I think we'll play that, and then when that's done, I'll give you kind of some background in terms of the program and how I ended up writing a book about it. Excellent. Thanks for that. So I wanted to play that just to again give you a bit of a visual sense, because it really, was such an amazing program in a lot of different ways, and an amazing experience for me to researchers and write a book about it. As Daniel mentioned, I spent months traveling across West Africa, sometimes with the scouts as they were looking for players. And so I want to give you just kind of some background in terms of how the program started, what its goals were, how I approached writing the book. And then I think Daniel has some questions, and then we can open it up for Q&A. So as Daniel mentioned, Football Dreams, it's the largest talent search in soccer history. I think probably the largest talent search in sports history, although that's a little bit harder to gauge. It was launched by Aspire Academy in 2007 and ran for 10 years. So, and it ended up scouting over 5 million 13-year-old boys, and selecting nearly 200 to train at a specialized academy to try and become top professionals. So the first question is, so how did this all come about? How did Qatar end up sending scouts all across Africa looking for soccer's next superstars? And the story actually goes back to the beginning of the 2000s. One of the members of the Qatari royal family, a guy named Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, who's the brother of the current emir, he's a huge soccer fan, and decided that he wanted to make it his mission to try and produce a world-class Qatari national team, one that could really compete with the top teams in the world and qualify for a World Cup. This was before Qatar actually won the bid to host the World Cup, and Qatar had never qualified before. Now, Qatar had a long history of luring citizens from other countries to play for Qatar in the Olympics and all sorts of different sports, like weightlifting and chess and badminton, things like that. And they have tried to do that in soccer as well. They actually reportedly offered 3 Brazilian players $1 million ahead of the 2006 World Cup to play for Qatar, although it created a bit of a scandal and it didn't happen. But Sheikh Jassim had sort of a different idea. He wanted to see whether or not they could produce their own national team using the players in the country. And so, it was an ambitious project, but he had money to spend, and Qatar spent reportedly about $1 billion to build Aspire, which is a super high-tech sports academy located in Doha. He hired top coaches and scouts, mainly from Europe. And the first thing they did was they basically held tryouts for every young boy in Qatar to see what kind of soccer talent the country had. That was the advantage of Qatar being quite small, is that they could do that. They could basically hold tryouts for every young boy. There are only a couple 100,000 Qatari citizens. And he quickly, or the folks who were running these trials sort of quickly realized that, although they found they said 1 or 2 boys in each age group who they thought were good enough to potentially become good national team players, there weren't enough kids in each age group for those kids to have competition. And so they didn't really think it would be possible to develop them in the right way. And so they thought, well, how can we address this? And they decided that if they could find foreign players and bring them to Aspire in Doha and have them train alongside the Qataris, that it would provide them the competition they needed for the better players to actually improve. And so they started doing this kind of piecemeal based on the coaches and scouts who were at Aspire in Doha, people who knew coaches back in Africa and who maybe knew players that could come, and they would hold little tryouts, and they sent a small group and ended up actually picking up a player from Ghana to join the academy. But again, it was done on a very piecemeal fashion on a small scale. And so at the same time, apart from all of this, there was a guy named Joseph Colomer, who at the time was the sports director, the youth director at Barcelona, the club. And he actually helped jumpstart Lionel Messi's career while he was there. And while he was at Barcelona, he was invited to Senegal by a sports agent there to come scout for young players. And he traveled to Senegal a couple of times, and this local agent took him all across the country and showed him a bunch of young players who would, they'd hold little tryouts, and he would scout kids to see if any were good enough to go to Barcelona. And actually ended up finding one who he brought over to Barcelona to at least play a little bit with the youth teams there. And he got really excited about this because he was blown away by the level of raw talent that he saw in Senegal as he was traveling across the country. And he and this local sports agent kind of hatched this plan that, well, imagine if you could conduct kind of a wide talent search across Senegal. Imagine the players you would find. And they're very excited about this, but the problem is that they didn't really think they'd be able to get the money to do it because it would be quite expensive and logistically difficult. And they didn't even think clubs like Barcelona would be necessarily interested because of the expense and difficulty. And also FIFA has some restrictions on transferring youth players across international borders. And so, this was in sort of a 2005 timeframe, and Joseph left Senegal kind of excited about this idea, but disappointed that he didn't think it could potentially become a reality. And then fast forward sort of a year or two later, and Joseph ended up leaving Barcelona and connecting with a guy at Aspire named Andreas Bleicher, who was the sports director there, who was in charge of finding talent for Aspire. And basically Joseph pitched him on this idea that, what if we held a tryout, in a place like Senegal, a big tryout, we could find the players you guys need to come to Doha. And they ended up pitching the idea to Sheikh Jassim. And basically what ended up happening is they did just that, but they didn't confine it to Senegal. They ended up, launching Football Dreams, which at first was in, I think, 7 countries across Africa. It would eventually expand to over a dozen countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. And they ended up, holding tryouts, as I said, for over 5 million 13-year-old boys. And so basically, I was excited about the concept of writing a book about this. When I was working for the AP in Cairo in 2007, when the program first launched, I went and visited the first group of boys who were at their final tryout in Doha and wrote a story about them, and was just kind of fascinated by the program, and thought even at that time it would be an amazing book or a movie or something like that. But I just didn't really have the time to focus on it. Years went by. As Daniel said, I spent a lot of time in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but the story always stuck with me. I always wondered what happened to those talented African boys that I saw in Doha in 2007. What had happened to them? What had happened to the program? And so eventually decided to write a book about it, and spent 4 years traveling all across Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and ended up writing the book through the lens primarily of 3 boys, 2 from Senegal, Diwandu Diong and Ibrahima Jeju, and 1 from Ghana, Bernard Appiah. And basically kind of told the story through the lens of how those boys were found, what happened to them, why Qatar was doing this story that I explained to you. And, there were a lot of ups and downs along the way. I think, there was controversy associated with the program. There were folks who wondered whether these kids were going to end up playing for Qatar in the World Cup. Those suspicions spiked once Qatar won the World Cup bid. There were just challenges that go along with trying to find, soccer's next superstars. I mean, one of the things I write about in the book is the sports science, and you just realize just how difficult it is to try and tell at a young age which player has, what it takes to succeed. And so, 3 players that I wrote about, Diwandu, Ibrahima and Bernard had sort of different trajectories and different levels of success. But again, it was just a fascinating thing to write about, a fascinating program, and look forward to answering any questions that Daniel has about it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sebastian. I would like to encourage all attendees to start posting their questions in the Q&A function. Sebastian, my first question is, your book was published in 2018. I think those who read your book prior to today's event might be excited to know what happened since 2018 to the three main characters in your book, Ibrahima, Bernard, and Javandu. Could you briefly share with us their stories in the aftermath of the book? I assume you still have contact with them.
Yeah. So again, they had different sort of levels of success and different trajectories. I would say the most successful of the three ended up being Diwandu Diong, again from Senegal. He ended up making it to Barcelona, played mostly with their youth team, but was never able to really break into the senior team. He ended up going back to the Belgian club that Qatar, that Aspire bought as part of this program, Eupen, and played there for a number of additional years, and then actually now is playing in India, which is not necessarily a place that people think about first when they think about soccer, but he's playing in their top league there. And so, I've kind of followed how he's been doing at a distance. And again, he's continued to play. Ibrahima, who actually ended up leaving the program a bit early, played in Norway for a number of years, but unfortunately suffered a pretty bad injury. He broke his leg, and he hasn't really been able to kind of bounce back from that. But even with a couple years in Norway, I mean, it's interesting. He was able to really kind of transform his family's life back in Senegal. I visited his hometown in Ziguinchor, and he grew up in the whole family basically living in one room, and he was able to build a new home for his house and his family, and a new home for his mom and his family. And so, even though he didn't achieve the success that he had wanted and people had hoped for him, again, it still, I think, was a good outcome for his family. Bernard, unfortunately, had the toughest story. He also ended up leaving the academy early under sort of some controversial circumstances that I discuss in the book, and he just was never able really to bounce back from it. He tried through various avenues to get back on his feet and get another chance in Europe, and just it never ended up working out for him. So I've actually kind of even helped Bernard a little bit, try and figure out what could be a sustainable path for him. But it's continued to be a tough road for him, which, to be honest, it is for a lot of players, for almost all of the players who grow up in places like Africa and dream of becoming top soccer stars someday. An infinitesimally small number of them actually succeed, and many more struggle to sort of figure out what to do with the rest of their life once those dreams don't work out.
Mm-hmm. Aspire Academy describes on its website Football Dreams as a humanitarian project. Do you concur that humanitarian considerations were the main drivers for starting the program in 2007?
So I don't personally believe that they were the main drivers. Again, that doesn't mean that the main drivers were in conflict with it being a humanitarian program. I think the main drivers were really trying to find these players who could train with the Qataris and help them improve, and maybe play for Qatar's national team. I think that there's definitely suspicion that, at least at the beginning of the program, that was the plan. And so I think that was the real driver. All the conversations I had that was sort of the impetus for the idea. And then I think alongside of that was developed this idea, well, it could also be a humanitarian program, because we're going to help kids who wouldn't have otherwise had a chance, potentially become professionals. They could, study while they're training. They also handed out a bunch of sports equipment while they were doing the tryouts. And so I think that, the humanitarian aspect kind of evolved in parallel, but I do think that the sort of real initial goal was to figure out a way to try and improve Qatar's own players.
The Aspire Academy website highlights the fact that an outcome of football dreams were the transfers from Javandu, as you already mentioned, to Barcelona, and Henri Onyekuru, my pronunciation might be wrong, to Everton.
Yeah.
However, Javandu only played once for the first team of Barca, and Henry never for Everton. They are playing now for professional teams in India, as you mentioned, and Turkey. Since the outcome of the program is not that the next Messi, Neymar, Ronaldo were discovered, would you consider the program as a failure?
Yeah, again, I think it depends on how you measure it. I think if you if you look at the goal of using the program to improve Qatar's own players, I would say that ended up being a failure because they only hosted a few of the kids in Doha. And that didn't really work out. They thought too much of a cultural adjustment for them. And so they ended up hosting almost all of the kids they found through this program through a satellite academy that they set up in Senegal. And so the interaction with the Qatari players was pretty few and far between. And so I don't think that kind of goal of the program ended up really playing out. I think, whether other goals were successful, it kind of depends on who you talk to, because it seemed like different people who were part of the program had different goals. Some of the folks were most interested in improving the Qatari players. Some of the folks like Joseph Colomer were interested in just trying to find the sport's next superstars. He thought he could kind of find the next Messi in Africa. Again, that didn't really play out, I think, for a variety of reasons. Again, one, because it's just incredibly difficult to forget about finding the next Messi. I mean, that's like finding a needle in a needle stack. But, even finding players who could just make it at a top team in a top league is just very, very difficult. And then I think that the program had a lot of problems with age cheating, which is an issue in Africa, where kids they end up lying about their ages and saying they're younger than they are, and so it makes it seem like they're better than they are, and then they don't necessarily have the potential that you think they have. So I think that hindered their ability to really produce top players. Now, if you look at it through the humanitarian lens, again, that's something that some people in the program emphasize more than others. I do think that it definitely had the impact that some players were able to achieve things in their lives that they weren't going to otherwise, and that players probably got opportunities that they weren't going to otherwise. There were a lot who didn't, who felt unhappy at the end of it. And I think that maybe they had some unrealistic expectations about what the program was going to do for them. And so I think that there were definitely some humanitarian outcomes that were good for some players. I think they spent a lot of money. It's not open, it's not public about how much it spent, but some of the folks involved said it could have been $100 to $200 million. That's a lot of money to spend. So if you were purely going to have a humanitarian program, would you have a humanitarian program like this? I think that's a question mark. So again, I think it's a little bit hard to say black and white whether it was a success or a failure. I think it depends on what your goals were exactly, and the goals were different for different folks in the program. And again, even those goals, I don't think the outcomes were black and white.
So the program scouted millions of boys across the globe. By the way, the Aspire Academy website states 3.5 million. I think you are writing 5 million even. But regardless of whether it was 3.5 or 5 million, I had a different question on gender. Was there ever a discussion to extend the program to female football players?
I never heard any discussion about doing that. You know, culturally speaking, that's has been a little bit challenging in Africa, where they did a lot of their scouting. There have been groups who have set up academies for female players. There's a great academy in Ghana called Right to Dream, and they have a female program, but they say that they find it very difficult sometimes, even when they find a very good player, to convince the player's family to let her come and train at the academy. So I never really heard that at Aspire or in Football Dreams as a real goal. I think if it had been, that they probably would have experienced some of those same challenges. But yeah, they never went down that path.
Your book was positively reviewed in a number of media outlets around the world. How were the reactions from Qatar? Did you receive any feedback from those who run the program in Aspire Academy?
Yeah, you know, my relationship with Aspire, I think, got a little bit tense over time as I was working on the book. You know, I think, yeah, I'm sure this is probably a sensitive issue in Qatar, but at least my experience, and this is an experience of one person, so people can take it for what it's worth. I found that there were challenges with transparency, that there didn't seem to be as much as a culture that was open to transparency and the kind of digging that journalists would normally do. I think that there was more of an interest in just maybe communicating what might be sort of the press release version of a story. And so I think that it seems like the folks at Aspire grew a little uncomfortable over time, because they saw that I was just kind of pursuing my book as an independent project, and I didn't have an agenda or anything. I was just kind of reporting what I found, but I think they felt that some of the things that I discovered, they probably would have preferred I not print. And so I never really got kind of a response from them on the book, which is too bad, because I really enjoyed meeting those folks. I think they really cared about the kids in the program and were trying to do their best. I think things didn't always go as planned, but that's how things work, especially with something as complex as Football Dreams. And so, you know, it was kind of sad for me at the end. I felt like I didn't really have the conversation or interaction with Aspire that I had hoped would be the case at the end of the book process. I hope they read the book and found it interesting. I personally felt it was very balanced, and other folks who read it who were not affiliated with Aspire felt it was a very balanced take on the program. In fact, I sort of felt, sometimes I got criticism from folks saying I wasn't critical enough of Qatar, and then some criticism saying I was too critical, and so it sort of makes you feel like you're maybe in the right place in the middle.
The book is very balanced, and you obviously had not an agenda against Qatar. I mean, for sure.
Yeah. No, and so again, I don't know what they thought. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed meeting all of them, and so, you know, I hope they found the book and interesting.
My last question before opening up the discussion to all attendees. You mentioned before the issue of age cheating. And after reading your book and also having previously discussions with you, I feel like this is the main factor why the next superstar was not found. Could you elaborate on the matter of age cheating and also tell us, is there anything talent scouts can do to detect age cheating?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, age cheating is a problem in youth football in Africa and other parts of the developing world, where record keeping maybe isn't quite as ironclad as it is in other spots. And again, it occurs when players They say they're younger than they are to make it seem like they're better than they are, and that they have more potential. And I didn't really know a lot about this. It wasn't something when I first kind of started my conversations with Aspire that sort of was really at the forefront of my mind. But then when I went and spent a bunch of time in West Africa, I started to hear it more and more. And then I started to realize that these players that I was focused on, most of them were not the ages that they said they were. And it can be very difficult. I mean, you know, especially for a program like Football Dreams that's scouting millions of kids, you know, how much attention can you focus on any single one in terms of determining exactly how old they are? You know, they require them to bring an ID or a school ID, but those are easily faked, or at least they were at the time I was writing the book, and they were doing the program. And you can understand why kids do it. I mean, they're looking for any opportunity, any chance that they have to kind of make a better life for themselves and their families. And so if this is what they have to do, they do it. And the challenge for the scouts, like the ones involved in Football Dreams, is that you have this whole local network that's trying to convince you that the kid is an age that he is not. You know, the local coaches, the family, they all have an incentive for the kid to get into your program. And so they're all trying to deceive you. So it is difficult sometimes. I think if you spend enough time and ask the right questions, you can start to kind of realize if a kid is roughly the age he is or not, you know. That's what I discovered, but it takes effort and it takes time, and it's challenging if you're scouting a large number of players. I mean, when I visited other academies in West Africa, again, like the Right to Dream Academy that I mentioned, they said obviously this is a problem for them as well. But, you know, I think they have a lot of local knowledge. They've been there for a very long time. So I think that they kind of did maybe a better job at sort of figuring out what the real ages or general ages of were the kids they were scouting, where a lot of the Football Dreams scouts were Europeans that were brought in from outside. And I think it was more challenging for them, especially at the beginning, to really understand how pervasive a problem this was. Now, it may have improved in Football Dreams as the program went on. I mostly wrote about the early years because those were the kids that had gone professional when I was writing the book. But it was definitely a big challenge for them, and it's been a big challenge for many academies operating in Africa.
Thank you, Sebastian. So I'm glad to see that we have such an active audience. There are 16 questions already being asked. The first question refers to a best-selling book, Outliers, and which I also read. It talked about birth dates being the leading indicator for hockey stars in Canada. For instance, the players born in January went on to become the superstars because they were more mature than their peers. Did you see this as a dynamic in African footballers too? I would like to add that from the German team that won the World Cup in 2014, I think most players were also born January, February, March. Sebastian.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big problem in international football, not isolated to any one country or league. You know, the relative birth date effect has proven to be a huge problem in English football. Something like 60% of the players, professional players, were born in the first quarter of the selection year. So, you know, this is a big problem. This, you know, choosing kids who are bigger, faster, stronger because they were born earlier the year is a huge problem that a lot of scouts, it's a big mistake that they make, because the problem with it is that those aren't good indicators of whether a kid's going to make it or not. And so sometimes you fall for picking that kid because he's bigger, faster, stronger, but those aren't the traits that are going to separate the players. The other thing that makes it even more challenging is not just when they're born in the selection year, but also that the biological age of a child can vary quite considerably relative to their chronological age. So, for example, 13-year-old boys, the boys they were scouting in Football Dreams, there can be a 6-year window that their chronological age can differ from their biological age. So, for example, you could be looking at a 13-year-old boy who has a body of a 16-year-old, or a 13-year-old boy who has a body of a 10-year-old, depending on whether they're an early or late mature. So that compounds it, because again, once those late matures catch up, they could be even the better players. But if you're picking the bigger, faster kids at the time, you're going to make mistakes and not pick the players who necessarily have the most potential.
Next question, why did the program end in 2016? Were the results not encouraging?
Yeah, so, again, this was, I think, one of the transparency issues. It wasn't entirely clear why it ended. I think one of the issues was that it was a super expensive program, and that this was when natural gas prices had plummeted. And so there were a lot of pressure for budget cuts across Qatar, including at Aspire. So I think Football Dreams was one of the things that ended up getting cut. I think, again, if you look at what the original goal of the program was to improve Qatari players, in 2016 it almost had no connection to that, and so perhaps they thought, well, does it really make sense to continue to do this if it's not aligned with the original goal? I don't actually know. I think the folks at Aspire I spoke to mainly focused on the cost, but I don't know if there were other considerations that went into to choosing to end the program.
The next question asks about naturalization, but I believe none of the African kids was naturalized, right?
Yeah, so none of the kids through the Football Dreams program ended up playing for Qatar. There was a player, I mentioned that Joseph Colomer, the youth director of Barcelona, when he first went to Senegal to scout before Football Dreams, he found a player he took to Barcelona. That player then came to Doha to Aspire and ended up playing for Qatar's, I think, under-19 national team, but actually sadly passed away due to cancer after that. So there were players that were kind of involved in the ecosystem that ended up playing for the Qatari national team, but none of the Football Dreams players officially ended up playing for Qatar.
Mm-hmm. Next, this was by Camilla, a student of, this was by Natasha, a student of mine. Next question is also by a student of mine, Camilla. She asked, do you believe there should be a moral obligation for recruiters to ensure a decent, stable future for the athletes scouted from poor areas, since they sacrifice their childhood time with their families in their home countries in pursuit of a better life?
Should they guarantee? Is that what the question was?
I think, yes. Is there like a moral responsibility for like children with a like poor country background to take like long-term care of them? I think it's a question.
I see. Yeah. So yeah, this is a question mark, I think, and it's it's hard to know exactly what the right answer is. There were definitely players in the program who felt like once they got toward the end, once they were graduating from the academy, that they didn't get enough support from Aspire to find a team in Europe, which had been their dream. And so there ended up being a bunch of kids who were unhappy. Now, I think it's possible that Aspire could have been a little bit better organized in terms of the process of them connecting with teams. But they did, I think, try to some extent. I also think like it's hard because there's only so much Aspire or any academy can do, because there are most of the kids in any academy are not going to make it, and so the Aspire did provide them and their family with money along the way while that they were in the academy, did offer them the chance for education, and so Aspire did offer them quite a bit. Now, did they have the responsibility to do even more than that if the kids don't make it. Other academies don't. You know, once you're out, you're out. So you could say, well, why should Aspire be any different? Now, if you say it's a humanitarian program, which other academies don't call their, you know, youth football programs humanitarian programs, does that mean you have more of a responsibility? I guess perhaps, but Qatar was also, I think, doing more already. So it's not a black and white issue, but it definitely was the case that there were kids who at the end of the program were unhappy and felt like they didn't achieve what they expected and blamed Aspire. And you know, I think in some ways you're always going to have that, because again, there's always going to be a lot of kids who don't make it.
The next question is our first audio question by Professor Nadim Nassif from Notre Dame University. Nadim, please. Nadim, you might, yes, I think you can talk now. Professor Nassif, we cannot hear you. Let me read the next question and then we try it again with Professor Nassif. Maybe there's an issue with muting and unmuting. There is a new football documentary where a young Syrian refugee is recruited into the Aspire Academy. Is Aspire still scouting for players worldwide, and if so, why?
Yeah, I haven't seen that documentary, so I'm not familiar with it. I actually don't know. I know they're not. So Football Dreams is not running anymore, and I believe they actually closed the satellite academy in Senegal last year. So they're not scouting through Football Dreams as they were previously. Whether they continue to look for players through other programs, I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised, because again, I think it had always been the idea at the beginning of Aspire that they would bring foreign players into the academy on scholarship. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. I think we skipped the next question on citizenship, which was already kind of answered. And then there is the next question: how were the regions for scouting selected?
Yeah, so they again first started just in Africa, and that was basically because Joseph had made this trip to Senegal and connected with this local sports agent, and that's where he'd had the idea, and they thought Africa would provide a very good place to do a search like Football Dreams, because you have a lot of kids who grow up playing in the street and develop amazing skills, but don't always get the opportunity to develop those skills in the kind of environments you have at academies in Europe. And so they sort of picked you know, a variety of countries in West Africa, East Africa, and South Africa, and that was mainly just where they had connections and where the countries that had the greatest sort of football traditions, and then they eventually expanded it to some countries in South America and to Southeast Asia. I think in some ways those were less driven by where they necessarily thought they would find the kind of next big star, but maybe a little bit more politically. Some folks have said that may have been driven by the Qatar World Cup bid, because several of those countries were on the executive committee that voted for the bid. Again, the Aspire folks denied that was the reasoning, but that was a suspicion.
I make a second try with our first audio question. Professor Nassif, can you hear me? No, so we seem to have a technical issue. Then we continue with written questions. From your travels on the African continent and seeing the abundance of football talent, what do you think football administrators should do to ensure that these young players reach their full potential?
Yeah, again, I mean, it's challenging because it's very difficult, again, to tell from a young age which players are going to be the ones to make it. You know, some sports scientists say actually better than talent identification would just be to keep as many people in the development, keep as many kids in the development pipeline as possible for as long as possible, because over time it will become more clear which ones have the potential to make it, and the more you keep in the pipeline, the higher the probability you're going to have the right kids. And so I guess, you know, the answer would be, if you weren't dealing with you know, any expense limitations, would be to keep the program very broad, and so try and keep lots of kids in the development pipeline, and then winnow it out over time. But again, it's very expensive and challenging to do. So I don't think that there really is a silver bullet. I think the thing that all academies should do is make sure that they prepare the kids for a plan B, which has to involve education, because again, most of these kids are not going to make it. Even the ones that are talented might get hurt. And so they need some other path if they don't make it, so that they don't just feel lost and struggling to sort of figure out a way forward.
Yes, the next question is from a student I know. He is an Aspire Academy graduate. I think he was an Aspire in the fencing program. And he writes that he thinks that what is discouraging is the absence of the need to depend on sports for a living in Doha. Do you think that's a valid explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a challenge that the folks at Aspire were having. In a way, it was a challenge they were trying to address with Football Dreams, by bringing in these kids who were in some ways hungrier to make it, you know, to kind of push the best players at Aspire to improve. You know, the African kids that were in Aspire said that, you know, sometimes the kids pulled up to practice in Ferraris and Bentleys and didn't always show up to practice, and didn't seem as motivated to kind of make it as they were. And the African kids didn't really understand this, because this was their shot. But they, you know, the truth is that for most of these kids, you know, one kind of, you know, before, you know, Aspire was established, you know, becoming a professional soccer player, at least my understanding of speaking to people, wasn't seen as kind of that prestigious a route for a local Qatari citizen. And the kids knew that if they didn't make it, they were going to be fine. And so I think that is a challenge. I mean, I think, you know, when you have kids like the ones that they brought into Football Dreams from poorer backgrounds, who know that this is their one shot, they're probably going to put more into it.
So the next question is from a former student who works now as a journalist, I believe, and he asks, I have heard Barcelona's Musa Wake, I hope the pronunciation is correct, and Ajax Andre Onana were also Aspire graduates. Did they come up in your research on the Football Dreams program?
Yeah, Musa Wage, I would say Musa Wage in some ways is probably maybe been the most successful. Unfortunately, he's had a very bad injury in the last few months. But he was part of the Football Dreams program. He's from Senegal. He was at Barcelona. He represented Senegal in the 2018 World Cup and actually scored in the tournament. I think he became the youngest player from Africa to ever score in the World Cup. And so he was seen as quite promising. Again, unfortunately, had a very bad injury the last few months. I don't know how easy it's going to be to recover from that. I didn't catch the other name, so I'm not sure.
Ajax Amsterdam, Andre Onana.
I'm not these. So the reason I didn't focus on Musa Wage was because he is a younger player than the ones that I focused on. When I started writing my book, the players I focused on were players in the first 2 years of the academy, because they had already gone professional, and there was just more of a story arc to deal with in terms of writing a book about them. Musa Wage would have been a quite young kid in the academy at the time. So I just didn't really focus on him. And maybe if this other player that was mentioned is also from Football Dreams, it's probably the same thing, was probably quite young at the time that I was doing my book research.
Mm-hmm. Now, the next question asks, did the Qatari players really improve? Was the program a success for the Qataris?
Yeah, again, I don't think it was much of a success because they didn't keep the Football Dreams kids in Doha very long. They eventually shipped them all to the Satellite Academy in Senegal. They said they thought it was too much of a cultural adjustment. It really wasn't working out. Now, Aspire, I think, has actually done very well to improve Qatar's football program in general. I mean, I think that I don't know the exact numbers, but there were quite a few Aspire players that were on the team that won the Asian Cup in 2019. So I think that the Aspire has actually, I think, done a quite commendable job. Poured a lot of money and effort to it. And I think a lot of Yvonne Bravo, who is the head of Aspire, but I don't think the Football Dreams program ended up actually playing much of a part in that.
The next question asks, on African kids, don't you think that their journey also symbolizes cultural overlapping of how African players use this from their cultural perspective as an opportunity for a way out of poverty, while others view it as professionalism or athlete naturalization?
Yeah. So I think that there is an interesting tension there, that there are folks who, were very critical of the Football Dreams program because they felt like it was, corresponded with this long history of rich countries sort of harvesting the natural resources of poor countries, and were critical that maybe Qatar was trying to naturalize these players. But the interesting thing is that there are a lot of players in Africa or other probably developing countries that would be quite happy to play for Qatar, and that would be quite happy for the opportunity to come to Aspire. And so I think it depends on where you sit. I think, you can, from a macro perspective, it's understand to be sort of skeptical and suspicious of programs that might be seen as exploitation. But then when you get on the ground, you realize it's more complicated than you think, because there are a lot of kids who are looking for opportunities and would take an opportunity that maybe somebody else would call exploitation. I think you have to be careful to regulate those things to make sure that the kids aren't actually exploited. And I never saw any indication that the Aspire kids were treated badly, but there are also, there are rules that FIFA has about transporting kids across international borders. And those rules are important because you want to protect kids. And so it's important that any program, even one that maybe has a lot of money behind it, respects those rules.
The next question is interesting and asks whether are there any other initiatives currently out there that remotely approach where Football Dreams attempted to accomplish another sport? Are those programs working? If so, why?
I mean, I've never seen anything on the scale of what Football Dreams did in any sport. There are academies in different parts of Africa that are scouting, quite a few number of kids, but nothing that is being driven by state level wealth like you had with Football Dreams. And so I think it's kind of a one of a kind program. I don't know if we'll see its like again or not, but it's definitely something that hasn't happened in the past, and I don't see any programs that are comparable to it right now.
I mean, I just had last night, if I may jump in with a discussion with some friends who were Austrians and who referred to the example of Red Bull Salzburg, who just successfully transfer kids from some African academies, like just from Mali, for example. So, I mean, there are other academies, and some clubs rely on specific academies, right?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, Red Bull tried to launch their own academy in Ghana, I think it was, and it didn't work out for them. And so, but clubs definitely continue to, you know, try and source players. Top European clubs try and source players through, you know, academies in West Africa. You know, Sadio Mane, I think, came through Generation Foot in Senegal. And so there's definitely this pipeline of players that continues from, you know, different spots in Africa to clubs in Europe, but there's nothing that, again, has sort of approached the scale of what Aspire was doing with Football Dreams in terms of the number of kids they were scouting each year,
Yeah.
and the amount of money they were spending.
And these are just a number of private initiatives, and that was like a state effort. So the next question elaborates on my question on the perceptions within Qatar, and it asks, what do you think they would prefer you did not write?
I think, you know, the stuff about age cheating probably was not something that they would have preferred that I write about, just because, you know, it shows that a lot of the kids that got into the program were not the age that they said they were. Again, there were kids who were unhappy at the end of the program and sort of were critical of Aspire. Again, I think that, you know, was that criticism because they had unrealistic expectations? You know, I think partly. And, you know, obviously there have been a lot of questions around the naturalization issue and sort of how did that play out at the beginning of the program. So again, I don't think there was no, like, you know, smoking gun in my book that sort of said that this program was evil or anything like that. I just think that it wasn't the press release version of Football Dreams, which is, you know, again, it's like any organization, they would prefer that what's written about the program in the press or in a book correspond to kind of what they would want to put on their website. But the reality is that any program is more complex than what appears in the press release version. And so I just think there's always that natural tension between what an independent journalist is going to write and what an organization wants a journalist to write.
The next question, will the 2022 World Cup do anything good for the graduates of the program?
I mean, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact on the players because, you know, a lot of them by that age, by that time, will actually be sort of over the hill as players or approaching that. And I don't really see how in any systematic fashion that the 22 World Cup will make a big difference for them, especially since the program has now ended.
The next question is, what were the privileges awarded to the scouted boys?
Well, so they basically were most of them brought to this academy in Senegal in a town called Sali, and they would train, you know, with European coaches. They went to a private school as well while they were there. They would periodically make trips to Europe to play against European clubs in tournaments. They came to Doha to play, and there was a big, actually the same tournament that I first met Daniel at, a big youth tournament in Doha that they would come and play at every year. So there were sort of, and then also the kids' families received sort of a stipend while they were in the academy. And so that there were kind of a variety of different things a kid received if the kid made it in. And then the way they encouraged, because many of the tryouts were organized by local volunteers across West Africa. I think there were something like 6,000 of them, so a massive number because it was such a huge undertaking. Those folks were often sort of compensated by receiving free football equipment like balls and bibs and that kind of thing. And then if their player was selected to come to the final tryout in Doha, they were able to travel with the player, which was kind of a big perk for many of these coaches because they'd never actually been outside of their home countries. And so there were kind of incentives for the local folks on the ground as well to participate.
I believe the next two by Russell have been answered, so I move to MJ Lee. Sebastian, have you read FIFA's Garcia report, which documents the many aspects of corruption in Qatar's winning of the World Cup 2022 bid? If you have read it, does that influence your perspective on the use of Aspire and the Football Dreams program to win the bid?
So again, as I mentioned, there's definitely controversy around the Football Dreams program and its relation to Qatar winning the bid. There was like an internal memo that was put together that said that Football Dreams should help win the bid because of, various countries involved in the program had representatives on the FIFA executive committee. Did Football Dreams make a difference? I think it's possible at the margins. I think the factors that really determined who won that bid, there were much larger forces at work. Now, was there corruption? Was there not? There are a lot of allegations. I don't know for certain exactly what happened, but I do think that the Football Dreams may have played a bit of a role in that, but I don't think it was the major factor that determined that Qatar won the bid.
Mm-hmm. Now, Nadim Nassif, where we had a technical problem with the audio, posted his question in the Q&A. It's what is the outcome expected by the Qatari Football Federation? They competed in the 2019 Copa America, where they tied against Paraguay and lost against Colombia and Argentina. What are they looking for in the 2022 World Cup? Qualifying for the second round? And what are the plans for after the 2022 World Cup? Is there a belief by the federation that Qatar will be able to qualify for the future World Cups on a regular basis?
So yeah, I mean, this is a little bit outside the scope of my knowledge, because it's not sort of really related to Football Dreams. I think it remains to be seen. I think how Qatar does in the World Cup. I will be fascinated to see. They obviously won the 2019 Asian Cup, which was, I think, very impressive and surprised a lot of people. I think obviously it is a step up from there to compete against all of the best teams in the world, including powerhouses like Brazil and Germany and Argentina. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's a pretty challenging landscape for Qatar. Again, Qatar, even though I think Aspire has done quite a good job, and Qatar as a country, I would say, has done a pretty impressive job to put them in a position to win, say, the Asian Cup. But I think it is a very small country, and they are competing with very large countries with very long football traditions. So I think it's going to be pretty challenging for them. But sometimes the World Cup obviously throws up surprises, especially that involve the home country. So we'll have to see. And then after that, again, I think it's going to be challenging for them to qualify for the World Cup on their own. Will they be able to? I don't know. Maybe. They've definitely improved, so we'll just have to see.
Yeah, 2026, the World Cup will be expanded to 48 teams, 8 from Asia. So I think there's a good chance that Qatar qualifies also for future tournaments. Next question is, how did scouting techniques differ across countries and continents? What were the major issues in Southeast Asia and Latin America?
So, in terms of the scouting, I mean, they used the same systems to scout in all of the places they scouted for Football Dreams. And, the best players they found tended to be from West Africa. I think that's because those countries, out of all of the countries that they were scouting, had the deepest football traditions. So countries like Senegal and Ghana and the Ivory Coast, those were the countries that were really produced. Nigeria were producing the top players that they found. In terms of the techniques they used, to be honest, it wasn't very advanced. There's a lot of talk now about using data analysis and things like that to try and scout for players, although that's still not done as much on the youth level because there isn't as much data about the players.
It was just 11 against 11, right? As you described.
Yeah, it was pretty much just kind of watching kids play. They did some kind of measurements to try and determine sort of whether they were, their biological age, but again, that was pretty rough because it's based on knowing their actual birth date, which wasn't always accurate. And they did, sprint tests and things like that. But it was really kind of like old school scouting, mostly, again, Joseph Scolomer and his team of scouts kind of using their judgment and experience watching these kids play to determine which ones they thought had the most potential. I think that scouting is evolving quite a bit from a data analysis perspective. And I think in 10 years, youth scouting may look very different than it does right now. But it was pretty kind of old school in terms of the way they scouted for these kids.
Next question, do you feel Aspire can develop Qatari football players of a world-class level? Is there a depth of talent available in the country?
I mean, I think, it's a pretty tall order. Does it mean that they could ever produce sort of a top European player? It's possible, but again, I think the challenge that they have is the one that was identified by the folks who started Football Dreams, is it's not only that, if you have a small country, that the chance of having a player who has the potential to become really world class obviously is smaller, but then you need other players around that player to really challenge that player and push the player to grow in the way the player needs to grow. And so that's also a challenge in such a small country. I mean, never say never for anything, but I think, and look, in a country like the US, which is a large country, we now have players playing on the top clubs in Europe, but it's taken a long time, and we have a very large population, and still a lot of people think we're underachieving what we could. But Qatar is going to remain a small country, and so again, I think that they're doing what they can, but it's pretty challenging.
Well, the US is underachieving in men's football, but not in women's football.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Overachieving in women's football.
Yeah. Next question, how has foreign investment helped to further develop football leagues in Africa?
Yeah, there's not a lot of money, that has gone in, because basically what happened is in the 90s, there was a ruling called the Bozeman ruling, which basically it was a variety of components to it, but it basically gave players more control over where they could move between clubs. And so it gave them more bargaining power, which then increased the prices that clubs had to pay, which meant that a lot of clubs, what they did is they went to look for cheaper talent. And one of the places they went was Africa, because players, even top players in leagues there, might only earn a few $100s a month. And so a lot of the best talent has been sucked out of places like West Africa, and are playing in Europe at all sorts of different levels because they can earn so much more money. And so there's really not a lot of money in the local football leagues, and a lot of people bemoan the fact that the level has decreased so drastically there, because again, even if you can go play at a third tier in Europe, you're going to make more money. And so a lot of players just leave. And so, in fact, there's a lot of folks that say it's hard to even like get folks to come watch games in in Africa, and they need to make sure to schedule them so they're not at the same times as the big European League games, because people want to just stay home and watch those on TV. So it's a challenging thing for those leagues in Africa.
We had the first lecture in this series with David Goldblatt, and that's also what he writes in his recent book, that most leagues have like very low attendance, and there is this competition with satellite TV and the big leagues. Next question, did the Aspire Academy work with other state-run development organizations in Doha, for example, education above all?
Sorry, say that again.
Did the Aspire Academy work with other state-run organizations, for example, education above all?
I don't in Football Dreams, I don't think that there were any other state-run organizations involved, to my knowledge. Again, I think maybe some of those, programs evolved over time in parallel alongside Football Dreams. I'm not sure. I do know at the beginning, again, for the folks who emphasized the humanitarian aspect of Football Dreams, that they pointed to other things that the Qatari state was doing from a humanitarian perspective as to why it would make sense to do this with Football Dreams as well. But I don't think it was done in conjunction with any other state-run organizations.
So Manan, who asked the question for the Ajax player, just clarified in the Q&A that Onana is a Cameroon goalkeeper currently banned over substance use. Thank you for providing this extra information. Next question, in 2012, in 2012, Aspire bought the Belgian club CIRS Eupen. So we haven't talked about this. This is, by the way, in the small German part of Belgium. A lot of players from the Football Dreams project has been playing for this club. Also, many Qataris have played for Eupen. How would you describe the Eupen project? Has it been a success? You've been to Eupen, right?
Yeah, actually, I have to say the time I spent in Eupen was some of the most fun reporting that I did for the project, because it's this very small little town. And so, once you're there for a couple of weeks, everybody knows who you are and they wave to you as you walk down the street. And, I would go into a local pub and they would all want to talk to me about, Aspire and Football Dream, because the reality of it is that this town, I can't remember the population, but it's very small, maybe 20,000 people or something. And, they had this local team called the Pandas. And all of a sudden they just woke up one day and their local club was owned by, a Middle Eastern country that they didn't really know much about, and was filled with young African teenagers. And so it was quite an adjustment for a lot of the locals. And so there was a lot of talk about, what did people think of this? Was it good? Was it bad? And a lot of, players from the Football Dreams program and also Qatari players ended up going through the team. I think for Eupen, the fact that Aspire bought Eupen has been good for them. They got promoted to the first division and have now been in the first division for several years in a row, which is something they had never done, and were on the verge of bankruptcy before Aspire bought them. But I don't think the program has really kind of played out in terms of Football Dreams or Qataris as maybe they had imagined. There are almost no Football Dreams players left at Eupen. And there have been a few Qataris along the way, but I don't think they end up, a couple of them have gotten significant playing time, but most haven't. And I kind of keep an eye on it. I haven't seen many Qataris there recently. So I think Qatar may have shifted to other teams they own a piece of in Europe to have those players get European experience. So I don't think Eupen has necessarily worked out exactly as they had planned with Football Dreams and with the development of the Qatari players, but I do think it has been a good thing for Eupen as a football club.
There's another question. Would something like City Football Group compare to Football Dreams? They own clubs across the world and have bought players from Japan, Nigeria, Australia, and elsewhere. Although in some ways it's more organizational than state funded.
Yeah, I mean, in a way you can kind of make a comparison because like obviously Manchester City is owned by Abu Dhabi. And so, there is state level wealth that goes into the Manchester City ecosystem, and they have bought clubs around the world and are trying to source players from around the world. Again, it's a bit different from Football Dreams just because Football Dreams was purely or mostly a youth scouting operation. They did eventually buy Eupen, but Manchester City Football Club has mostly kind of started with the Manchester City team, and then they've expanded to other teams, which then have their kind of own academy systems and things like that. So the structure is a little bit different.
Mhm. Let's quickly try to answer remaining questions. I think we should not post additional questions anymore. A journalist is asking a bit of a general question. What are your views involving the business sector in developing sports?
I mean, I think, they're naturally intertwined. I don't know exactly sort of what the exact focus of the question is, but I think that if we look at the development of football in Europe, obviously has been driven by the private sector and business interests. I think again, with anything that's driven by business interests, where there are kids involved, you just need to make sure that the kids are protected and that, for kids who don't make it, that that they have a path to fall back on because, business interests are motivated by profit. And when you're dealing with a bunch of young kids, you just have to make sure that profit isn't the only thing that you're thinking about.
The next question on City Football Group has been already answered, I believe. Then there is the second last question. If these boys didn't make it to Qatar's national team, then who did?
I think, a lot of the players that came through Aspire, Qatari players, and maybe I know that there have been other players foreign origin who played for the national team in Qatar, but they didn't come through Football Dreams. And so I think it's been a mix of, players who have come through Aspire, maybe some players who were foreign born, and maybe some others as well.
I would like to refer to our blog. We have an article by Professor Ross Griffin on the background of the players in the national team. Last question, what role played the royal family in Qatar in this program? Was Yassin bin Hamad, the brother of the Emir, heavily involved?
Sorry, so can you repeat the question again?
The role of the royal family in this program, and specifically the question for Yassin bin Hamad, whether he was involved.
Yeah, I mean, he, my understanding is that, he was the driving force behind Aspire, and that, Aspire was obviously the organization that launched Football Dreams. I think he was involved, in terms of just he was involved with Aspire. He wasn't sort of involved in any kind of on the ground sense with the Football Dreams program, but I know that he was very keyed into what was going on in Aspire in general.
All right, so thank you, to all attendees for so many great questions, and thank you, Sebastian, for a fantastic talk. I tremendously enjoyed this event, and I would like to give the word to Dieter Live for some concluding remarks.
Thank you. I would like to thank the audience, of course, for joining us in tonight's discussion, and my gratitude to Sebastian and Daniel for sharing the impact of Qatar's sports industry on the human lives of individuals who play in the games. I encourage everyone to visit the CIRS website at cirs.qatar.georgetown.edu to learn more about the Building a Legacy Qatar FIFA World Cup 2022, to learn more about the research initiative and explore the interesting podcasts and blog posts. We hope to see you all at our future lectures and events, in particular at our next lecture on March 21st by Gisbert Unk, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the name properly. But anyway, it's on March 21st. Thank you again and good night.